So to kickstart our conversation, our discussion and our presentation, I just quickly highlighted the presentation flow in terms of how the presentation will flow. Of course, we'll look at the context around ethics, and then we'll just look at a few views from some members of the profession in terms of what they think about ethics, and then we'll, of course, define what ethics are. And then from there, we'll look at the features of ethics, slightly into the domains, and then we'll also look at, I think, which will be also more of a heavy conversation around the characteristics of internal auditors with a poor ethical standing. Then we'll look at the 7 deadly sins in internal audit as promulgated by Richard Chambers. And then we'll also look at a few ethical dilemmas in practice. Then as we go to our conclusion, we'll also look at how to foster good ethical behavior. Now, we'll start our presentation by asking a few questions. So these are questions to everyone on this platform. Do you think that winning is everything? Secondly, do you think that profitability is everything? Do you think that promotion in your job is everything? Do you think that money is everything? And finally, are you somebody that will do anything to succeed? If your answer is yes to all these questions, then I'm sorry to be the bearer of bad news that you are a very dangerous person. You are a very dangerous person. And I'll explain why. Why? Well, when you look at ethics, it detects, of course, how members of a profession conduct themselves. It lays emphasis on the fact that the means to an end are just as important as the end in itself. So while it is nice that the institution should win, or while it's nice that you should win in what you do, how you win is important. While it is important that as an institution you are profitable, how you become profitable is equally important. While it is important that you are promoted in your job, how and the means to which you are promoted is very important. So while it is also important that you make money, how you make that money is equally important. And while it is important that you succeed, how you achieve that success is important. Now, the means to an end is just as important as the end in itself. And the bridge between the means to an end and the end itself is what you basically call ethics. So ethics is what plays the gap, fills the gap between the two, the means to an end and the end in itself. And I put something that on face value sounds like an exaggeration, but I promise you it's not. It is the real facts on the ground. It is the reality that without ethics, we may not have society to talk about. In the mining sector, for example, there are what we call the produce that is from the mining, and then there are what we call waste products from mining. Now, if a mine doesn't care about profitability, for example, it will throw those into the water, which people drink, and then people have diseases, they get sick, and they perish. If you have no ethics in business, you commit corruption and bribery, which then undermines the very existence of society. So when we say that ethics is actually at the center of why society can exist, without ethics, there can be no society. And we need to keep that at the back of our mind. Now, when I was coming up with this presentation, I started doing a bit of research about Kenya. Of course, I know a lot already about Kenya, but I said, let me research a bit. And so I had an opportunity to ask Dr. Joyce Omina. She's the CEO of IA Kenya. And I asked her to say, just briefly, what do you think about ethics? And she said that as professionals, internal auditors must have integrity, objectivity, competence, due professional care, and confidentiality. But she went on to say that internal auditors must also be champions of ethical behavior in organizations by ensuring that there are no conflicts of interest and there is a whistleblowing mechanism to anonymously report all vices. So when we talk about professional ethics, a lot comes into mind, but it also concerns managing conflicts of interest and also ensuring that there's whistleblowing mechanisms in place. Then I called the president of IIA Zambia, Mrs. Esther Hamaundu, and I said, I need your opinion about ethics. And she said, in essence, ethics guides our actions, impact our interactions with others, and contribute to a harmonious and just society. So then again, I was very convinced that without ethics, we cannot have a harmonious and just society. Now, there is one thing that comes to mind when we talk about ethics. One of my favorite authors, Lakadek, says that it is always important to define what we are talking about, because people who think they are talking about the same thing may actually be talking about two different things or three different things. So I always believe it is important that as we have a conversation, we provide a definition. And so I was delving around saying, look, okay, what is ethics? And ethics is derived from the Greek word ethos, which means character. Well, ethics has everything to do with character. So it is a systematic approach to understanding, of course, wrong, good and bad, and admirable, and even deplorable, in as they relate to the profession and its work. So in the context of this conversation, ethics will be relating to what is good and bad and deplorable in relation to the internal audit profession. Now, it includes fundamental ground rules by which we conduct our profession and work. So, how do we conduct our profession and work? Ethics are the ground rules to that. Now, ethical determinations are applied through a use of formal theories and a code of conduct for professionals. So I know for sure that in the old standards, we used to call them the code of ethics, but now it's called ethics and professionalism in domain 2, right, of the new global internal audit standards, which came into effect on 9 January. So ethics is an active process rather than a static condition. In short, doing ethics is practical. It's not a one-time thing that you agree and you sit and you forget about it. As you experience circumstances, as you experience different interactions in your workplace, you practice ethics. So it's a doing thing. It's not a theoretical thing. Ethics is action. So when it comes to ethics, as professionals, we need to support our assertions and actions with sound reasoning. Ethics is subjective. And I hear people say, oh, what is right and wrong is subjective. What is morally right or wrong is subjective. Yes, it is subjective, but it must be supported by logic and reasoning. You cannot operate in a vacuum. Ethics does not operate in a vacuum. It must be backed by logic and theoretical based arguments that support our ethics. And the reason why we say this is because members of one profession, given a similar scenario, may not 100% come to the same conclusion, but they should be very close to each other. For example, if I ask Madame Dorothy and I say, can you doctor an audit report? I expect that she'll say no, because it goes against the ethics of integrity. It is the expectation that if I ask someone in Egypt or in the UK or in Malaysia, probably all of them, as long as they're internal auditors, will most likely say we can't doctor an audit report. Why? Because we are guided by the ethics of integrity, and though we may look at a situation differently, it is likely that we'll come to the same conclusion or very close to the same conclusion. That is important to highlight. Now, ethics have important features. And I tell people, there are just people who are designed in such a way that they say, no, me, I cannot participate. When you go to a court of law, the judge will recuse himself from presiding over a case. And this happen even in the daily life. If you meet something that you feel you're not ready for, you can say, you know what, I'm not going to participate. But one of the things that I've learned about ethics is that there's no one exempt from making ethical decisions. So regardless of who you are, as long as you are in a specific profession, as long as you are in the internal audit profession, at one point, you will have to make ethical decision. No one can absolutely avoid making ethical decisions, because by the nature of all these professions, it necessitates that at one point, you have to make an ethical decision. So when it comes to ethics, there are no sacred cows. Like these people belong to a class that cannot make ethical decisions. Everyone makes ethical decisions at one point in their life and in their profession. When it comes to ethics, other people are always involved. In fact, that is why ethics is a very important topic, because other people are involved, and therefore we ought to be careful and consideration when making ethical decisions. For example, if you write a frivolous internal audit report, you may affect the lives of others. People may lose jobs, may be suspended without pay, and all those things. So whenever you're making an ethical decision, remember that it affects people beyond just yourself. Now, there will never be a definite conclusion or resolution in terms of ethical debates. But like I said, the goal is to achieve some level of consistency and balance. There's no way that members of the same profession that are guided by the same ethics, one comes to conclusion A, the other one comes to conclusion Z. They are too far apart. The other one conclusion X, the other one conclusion B. They are too far apart. We must be in the same area, A, B, or C, close to each other. Then you know that the ethical guidance is achieving fruits. In the area of ethics, one cannot exercise ethical judgment without a choice. So one of the features of ethics is that you have a choice. A choice to take course route A or route B or route C. You have a choice. Without a choice, then there's no need for making an ethical decision. There's no need for ethics in the first place. When you have no choice, we can't say, if you only have one choice, we can't say, oh, take ethical considerations. You only have one choice. In that case, what do you consider? There's only one choice. So, very important that without choice, ethical judgment does not come in. For members of a profession, there's normally some form of guide that serves as a point of reference for ethical decisions. Otherwise, the notion of ethics becomes a game of chance or may lack consistency. This speaks to the reason why the Institute of Internal Auditors has got what we call professional ethics. Imagine if there were no ethics for internal auditors. What then becomes ethical behavior is a subject of chance, feeling, or circumstances in terms of how one was raised and how they perceive what is right and wrong. So the profession has something that serves as a reference point, which is domain 2, ethics and professionalism. For internal auditors, this guide is the principles and standards in the ethics and professionalism domain of the global internal audit standards, which is domain 2. So to that extent, I think we are moving together. Now, a bit into domain 2. Domain 2 is the ethics and professionalism. And I don't want to stay very much here because this is not a practical aspect. This is a theoretical aspect. So domain 2 is the ethics and professionalism domain. It basically outlines the behavioral expectations for professional internal auditors, including chief audit executives and other individuals and entities that provide internal audit services. So conformance to these principles and standards instills trust in the profession of internal auditing. If we don't conform to our ethics, no one is going to trust us. If we are unethical, no one is going to trust us. And we all know that trust is the basis for the work that internal auditors do. Now, all internal auditors are required to conform with the standards of ethics and professionalism, right? We are all expected to conform to these standards, which is the ethics and professionalism. So even if there's another code that we're expected to abide by, for example, we have the Zambia Institute of Chartered Accountants, they also have the ethics that they give us, but I'm expected to respect those ethics, and I'm also expected to conform with the ethics for internal auditors as guided by IIA. Now, the fact that for some of you, you read this domain, you read domain 2, and you start smiling because what you are planning to do is not well captured in the ethics and professionalism domain, and you say, good for me, this is not covered. You are warned. Please be cautioned that the fact that a particular behavior is not mentioned in these principles and standards does not preclude it from being considered unacceptable or discreditable. So you must use discretion to understand that this action I'm going to carry out, even if it is not explicitly prohibited in this ethics and professionalism domain of the standards, it doesn't mean that I'll go scot-free. It may put you in trouble regardless. So exercise a lot of professional judgment. Now, essential components of ethics and professionalism. Well, first of all, you have the principles and then you have the standards. So the principles are the guiding principles that enable effective internal auditing, right? So when you go into the global internal audit standards, you find that the domains are broken down into principles, and then under the principles, you have got the standards. So the principles are 15 in total, and under those 15 principles, you've got the standards. Now, the standards contain the requirements and consideration for implementation and examples of evidence of conformance. So basically, the standards are there to help you achieve the principle. So the principle and the standards must be read hand in hand and not in isolation. Very important to highlight. Very important to highlight that. Now, quickly, I've gone into the ethics and professionalism, the principles. We have, regarding domain 2, under ethics and professionalism, we have 5 principles. And these principles are supported by standards. Under principle 1, you are supposed to demonstrate integrity. So internal auditors demonstrate integrity in their work and behavior. How? By having honesty and professional courage, by understanding the organization's ethical expectations, and also by considering legal and ethical behavior. There are legal issues that come with the internal audit profession. You must take that into consideration. In principle 2, internal auditors are supposed to maintain objectivity. So internal auditors maintain an impartial and unbiased attitude when performing internal audit services and making decisions. One of those is that you are expected to show individual objectivity, and then you are supposed to safeguard your objectivity, and then you are supposed to disclose impairment to objectivity. But I want to express something about objectivity and why it is important. I had a personal experience. I was conducting an audit at a remote location. So I went to conduct an audit at this remote location, and when I was entering the gate, the guy who was responsible for finances at that hub I found him, he was outside smoking. When I looked at his appearance, he looked like a serious drinker, abuse of alcohol. The guy just looked, in my view, he looked close to a criminal than an accountant, just by his looks, rough hair, smoking, his eyes, red eyes. So according to me, I just said, this guy, there's something wrong about him. And guess what I did? I went and increased the samples for my testing. Increased all the samples. Literally, I was almost looking at the population because I just couldn't trust this guy. But when I was done with my work, I discovered it was of no use extending my sample because a good number of things were actually, the good number of criteria was actually met. I was expecting to find a lot of wrong things, but that wasn't the case. So I wasted time, and my decision to increase the sample was not based on professional reasons, but on my individual biases towards him. That was not professional, and I acted against the ethics. So we need to understand that we need to ensure that we don't bring our personal views, our personal vendettas, and bring them into the audit. Principle number 3, demonstrate competency. Internal auditors must apply the knowledge, skills, and abilities to fulfill their roles and responsibilities successfully. Under this principle, internal auditors are supposed to be competent. How? You must have the knowledge and skills and abilities that make you the right fit to perform your roles. Second to this is that there must be continuous professional development. And what we are doing here, this conversation that we're having here, is part of continuous professional development, reminding us that you cannot train and tell yourself that you are trained forever. You must train, retrain, adapt, readapt. That is the hallmark of being an internal auditor. In fact, if there's one profession that needs you to continuously improve yourself, it is the internal audit profession. The calling is noble. The work we do affects a lot of people, and that's why we cannot afford to be archaic and live in the past. We must move with the trends. Principle number 4, exercise due professional care. Internal auditors apply due professional care in planning and performing internal audit services. Under this one, you have standards to do with conformance with the global internal audit standards. The work we do, we must conform with the standards. If you look at the definition of internal audit, it talks about systematic and disciplined approach. You cannot be systematic if you don't conform with the standards. Internal audit is systematic, it is disciplined, and that's why we have got the standards. On top of that, you must exercise due professional care. We are not a careless profession. We are a profession of order. We are a profession of order. If you want disorder, leave the internal audit profession. This one is a profession of order and systematic approach. But we must also, above all, in exercising due professional care, we must exercise professional skepticism. I use this example and I laugh because, even at home, I take my professional skepticism. So, I laugh when my wife is telling me something and she'll tell me, oh, that money you gave me, I used it for buying ABCD. Then 2 days later, she tells me that money you gave me, I used it. I say, but which one did you use it for? That day you said you used it for this. Today you are saying this. Which is which? I'm always questioning her. And so my wife always remark, this is not auditing. This is a marriage. Why? Because I'm always skeptical. When you tell me something, I'm always thinking, is this really true? Could there be more to this? And it's expected. When you're skeptical, you rarely get hoodwinked. Imagine you're walking in town in Nairobi and this person comes to you and says, excuse me, Mr. Eliezer, are you able to hold this for me? Just for a few minutes, I'll come back. The first question is, why should I hold this for this person? Do I know this person? What is in this bag that this person wants me to hold? That will keep you safe. Because if you just get the bag and you're holding on to it, 3 minutes later, the police show up and say, there are drugs in this bag. And Mr. Ariaza says, but it's not mine. But were you skeptical? Did you ask the right questions? So very important to ask the right questions. As internal auditors, not everything management tells us is true. Some is partly true. Some is 100% untrue. Some of it has a bit of omissions in it. So as internal auditors, we must always exercise what? Professional skepticism. We don't take things at face value. We collaborate. That is an auditor that is exercising due care. Now, principle 5 is maintain confidentiality. Please, this is as clear as it can be. By the nature of our job, by the virtue of our positions as internal auditors, we will be exposed to confidential information. I want to tell you a story about confidentiality. I worked at a specific place, and during my work at that place, there was an opportunity for me to be promoted, but I was not promoted. So after not being promoted, I moved on with my life. Then at one point, I was performing an audit of the strategic plan. So one of the things I needed to do was to understand, to look at the minutes for board meetings, how the decisions were being made, and just look at, do they align the strategic plan? Are there discussions of the strategic plan and all that? And so while looking at that documentation, I came across these minutes for a board meeting where my possibility of being promoted was brought up in that meeting, and the board were discussing that possibility of me being promoted. I can tell you the things I read there that were submitted by someone in management. This person lied about my qualifications and my years of experience, and they literally lied about my curricula vitae. And I was there reading it for myself. You know, if I was unprofessional, I would have walked out of my office and gone to human resource and said, human resource, you said ABCD about me. This is not true. But as painful as those things I saw were, I just said, people can be so maliceful in this life. And it ended at that. There's nothing I could have done. I did not want to go and start saying this is not true, because they were going to say you got this information through conducting an audit. Now you are using it for your personal agenda. So that taught me that even in instances where it may be painful, as auditors, we need to maintain confidentiality unless there's a legal requirement for us to go the other way, to perform otherwise. Now, what then amounts to an ethical behavior? Really, I tried to be as simplistic about it because that's what we want to do. Ethics is not a complicated thing. It is an emotional thing. You have to think through it and make a decision. So it's a logical thing. So number one, conduct that shows a lack of integrity. So if you conduct yourself in a way that shows lack of integrity, as defined before in the previous slide, you would have behaved unethical. Now, I always say differentiate integrity from reputation. Reputation is what people think of you. Integrity is who you are when we're not seeing. So we know people who have a good reputation, but their integrity is very bad and questionable. So differentiate the two. Politicians like to have a reputation, but are they people of integrity? Sometimes it's not the case. Sometimes. Lack of objectivity in the performance of one's work. If you are not objective, then you are being unethical. If you are performing assignments without being competent or having the required expertise or competence, you are being unethical. Some people, you know, some people, they will go somewhere and read a book about auditing, and then they say, I'm an auditor and I can do all this work. That's not necessarily the case. To be an auditor takes a lot more than just reading one or two books. Failing to exercise due professional care will also make you unethical. Lacking confidentiality will also make you unethical. In its simplest form, I'm saying unethical behavior for internal auditors is any conduct that does not align with the ethics as stipulated in Domain 2 of the Global Internal Audit Standards. Now, the next conversation I like it very much. This is where I ask people, this is where we cast out demons. We ask people to say, please change. So here, and I'm saying this, here, if you see something on this list that you feel defines you, please repent and change. Because that would suggest that probably you are not having a good ethical standing. So I'm talking about the characteristics of internal auditors with a poor ethical standing. Number one, auditors with a poor ethical standing are obsessed with and always seeking validation and approval from management rather than expressing an objective opinion. Have you ever seen auditors who, they behave like the tune of management? You know, at who pays the piper controls the tune. And there are auditors who are like that. Whatever audit the management says, yes, 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 yes. Are you expressing an objective opinion, or are you taking what management is saying? Are you seeking validation? I had a very interesting experience, and I always use it as an example with my employee at the plot. So I was building a house somewhere within Lusaka in Zambia. And so I had this caretaker who was like my employee. He would stay at that place and then he would do work for me and I would pay him. So one day I walked to the plot and I tell this caretaker, I said, Mr. Paul, his name was Mr. Paul. I said, Mr. Paul, this tree that is growing near the house, you know what? I want us to cut it because I think that it can fall on the house and, it can harm the house. And I just don't want it to be there. Mr. Paul, in his response, was said, yes, boss, that's a good idea. Actually, I've been thinking for a long time. I was almost telling you that we should cut this tree. I agree with you. This tree is a hazard to the house. And, and even the roots, they will destroy the house. So we should cut it, boss. I agree with you. I'll actually mobilize people to cut it. Then, a few hours later, I said to him, I said, actually, Mr. Paul, I'm thinking, let's just leave this tree. It will give us some good shade. Guess what Mr. Paul said? Yes, boss, you are correct. Actually, I was thinking the same, that we should just leave this tree. It will be giving you some shade. Then, it dawned on me that whatever position I was going to have was also going to be Mr. Paul's position. He was not telling me something objectively. He just wanted to concur with me. So, there and then, Mr. Paul lost his right to be my trusted advisor because I realized he was more inclined on pleasing me than on giving me objective advice in terms of what he thought. Don't be that type of auditor that tells management what they want to hear. Tell management objectively what you think is the opinion. Are controls effective or not? Objectively, not what they want to hear. Please remember that. Fear of conflict or upsetting others, including management. Some of you auditors, you love peace. You want peace at all costs. You don't want to upset anyone. You are the peace soldier, the pure dove from the Bible, if I have to define. You like peace at all costs. Look, as an internal auditor, there should be a point where you say, look, I think we can't agree, but let's proceed. We'll report like this to the audit committee. Hello, am I audible? Eliaza, can you confirm?
Yes, Francis, okay. You are.
Thank you very much. So, fear of conflict. As internal auditors, we must respect our auditees. We must conduct ourselves with mutual respect and courtesy, but it is not ours to avoid conflict at all costs. We should only avoid conflict to the extent that it is acceptable. After that, we must accept that conflict sometimes is part of our work. For example, when I issue audit reports as the head of internal audit, there are some times when the auditees are not happy and we argue about the findings, and until evidence on the contrary is provided, we maintain. Now, whether they are happy about the findings or not, really, it would be nice if they were happy about the findings, but If they are not, we're not bothered really. Our only question is, have we reported objectively? If we have, their unhappiness or happiness really is secondary. So, very important. Number 3, an obsession with being everyone's friend and being liked by others. You know, there are some auditors, they want to be everyone's friend in the organization. Everyone should be your friend. Personally, I report for work. I have a professional relationship with everyone. I'll say, morning, how are you? I come in my office, I do my work. When I knock off, good evening, how are you? How's the day going? If someone has a funeral, I'll, of course, pass my condolences. If they have a birthday, I'll say happy birthday. But besides that, I'm not trying to get liked. You know, if you want to be liked by everyone, become money or ice cream. But you are an auditor. So quit the people-pleasing mentality. A lack of stamina to deliver bad news or results. You can't be an internal auditor and lacking stamina to deliver bad results. I always tell people that I always prefer to give good news, but I have no problem giving bad news. If that's the case, I'll tell you what the bad news is. But some of you are chief audit executives, right? When you see that a report is heated and it's heavy-handed, this report is heated, what do? You even tell your manager, manager, please come. I will not be presenting this report as the chief audit executive. I'm delegating. Please present it. Why? You know, I performed at an audit at one institution, and the report had glaring issues. And the head of department didn't want to be the one to deliver the report, but because they had no option but to deliver it, they started saying, also, this audit was performed by Francis. I said, how do you put me on the spot like that? Stand by the findings. Are they supported by evidence? Yes, stand by them. Don't be scared about giving bad news. When you give bad news, it is expected that next time you most likely not give bad news if your auditors listen and take the advice and carry out the management action in the audit report. Some of you auditors use professional work to sort out personal vendettas. Someone doesn't talk to you in the organization, you have a grudge against them. Now you start using audits. You know the problem with the audit reports prepared on personal vendettas? Mostly people can read between the lines. They're poorly prepared. They actually show even on the surface that no, this was a personal vendetta. So don't be that type of auditor. Don't be overly obsessed with money. Some auditors love money. You just want to travel. You know, in Zambia, there's what we call daily subsistence allowance. When you go on to work out of station, they pay you an allowance. Some auditors are too obsessed with that has made them unprofessional. They are always chasing the CEO and the senior management in the organization. We want to travel, asking for trips and all that. Please don't be obsessed with money. Don't be too obsessed with being promoted. You know, when people notice that you are too obsessed with being promoted, they dangle the carrot. You know, if you can issue out this type of reports, we can work together. You know, I'm actually thinking of promoting you. Don't be too obsessed with being promoted. Promotion will come when it is time to come. No one can take away what is really meant for you. So don't be too obsessed with being promoted. Carry out your work with zeal and energy. If promotion comes, it has. Well and good. If it doesn't, well and good. You are still going to be objective. An unwillingness to learn combined with a know-it-all mentality. You cannot be an objective auditor if you are unwilling to learn. I always tell people that every audit is an opportunity for me to learn something new. So I go in an audit, I learn something new, I'm getting much better and much better for the upcoming audits, the future audits. I don't have a know-it-all mentality. I want to learn from the auditees. They are the process owners. What can I learn from them? I make use of that. That's what helps you to be an auditor of good ethical standing. You cannot be highly opinionated and not open-minded. Some of you, someone tells you, no, look, this is happening because of ABCD. They give a reasonable explanation, your auditees, but you are just closed-minded and you're opinionated and you just think what you think is what should happen. Don't be that type of auditor. Some of you are auditors with a high appetite for gossiping. The moment they give you payroll to go and audit, you look at the CEO salary, you look at the CFO salary, you go to your friends. Guys, This institution, we are underpaid. But when you look at what others are earning, it's not fair. You are the one now fueling office gossip. Once management gets to know that you are the one who's doing that, next time they will not give you payroll. They start becoming difficult to give you information that you need. Wanting to keep a job at all costs. I'll tell you this, as an internal auditor, there should be a point where you should be able to say, you know what, this does not reflect who I am and I'm going to leave. And I tell people that the internal audit profession is for strong people, because at one point in your career, you may get bruised. There's no reason for you to stay in a job where you are being asked to doctor audit reports and then you stay in that job and you continue. Because when it backfires real bad. So when you think you cannot bear it anymore, leaving should also be an option. Financial challenges of poor financial management. You can't be an auditor and be a poor financial manager. You know, there are some auditors I know, every time he's asking for money from auditees. Are you able to lend me some money? Are you able to help me with some money? I'll bring back tomorrow or next week. But this guy is owing almost all the auditees. How do you even audit them? Because the moment you give a truthful opinion is the day they call you to say, pay me back my money. And some of these auditees are clever. They will never ask back for their money back as long as you are giving good reports. They'll just keep quiet. They know that you owe them, and you owe them something. You owe them money, and because you owe them money, you owe them a good report. Be careful. Manage your finances very well as an internal auditor. In fact, internal auditors must be good at managing their resources. You can't be an internal auditor and highly indebted and failing to manage your resources. You will become for sale to the highest bidder. Please manage your resources very well as an auditor. That is the hallmark of an internal auditor with good ethical standing. Finally, I put this statement to say that internal auditors with great obsession for success or money are the easiest to manipulate and frustrate. Me, where I am here, I've told myself, if they don't make me fly to a destination, I'm good. I'll still issue the reports objectively. If they don't put me on a trip, I'm good. I will still issue. But don't be a type of auditor where if you cannot put on a trip, you're almost dying because now you're under pressure financially. Then you start going to lobby. See you, look, I needed this trip. How then can you give an objective opinion about your audits? Please be an auditor in good ethical standing. Now, Richard Chambers, most of us know Richard Chambers, the former CEO of the Institute of Internal Auditors. He listed 7 deadly internal audit sins. And I looked at them and I said, look, I can actually attach these to the professional ethics. Number 1, publishing an erroneous report. This goes against the principle of competency and due professional care. It goes against those. Because how then do you publish an erroneous report? Either you're not competent or you did not take the required level of care. Number 2, submitting incomplete or false work papers. This has to do with integrity. If you're going to doctor work papers, it is also going to do with your objectivity. And are you taking the necessary due professional care? Maybe not. Losing your temper with a client, due professional care. An internal auditor is supposed to conduct themselves with utmost due professional care. Don't lose your temper with clients. If you don't agree, document it, move on. Auditing with an agenda. You can't audit with an agenda and say you're objective. Some of you, the reports you issue is basically about fighting others. It's not about the persons, it's about the process. Betraying a bond of confidentiality. Don't take information you get in the conduct of your audit work and start dishing it out there. When it is found out, you lose your ability to be given confidential information. Violating company policies. You can't be an auditor and be the one who's violating company policies. This speaks to integrity. You're not carrying yourself with integrity if you're violating company policies. You must lead by example. Issuing internal audit reports that are petty or don't add value. You cannot specialize in small things as internal auditors. Focus on what matters. You know, there's a story which has been told of a giant killer whale. You know the giant killer whale? Those big whales that are found in the ocean. It was chasing sardines. You know sardines? Those small fish. So those small fish, they were running towards the shore, and this big giant whale of the sea kept chasing these small fish called the sardines. And then, because of chasing those small fish, the whale went and got stuck on the shores because it was too big and it got stuck on the shores. The headline in the newspaper the next day was that the giant of the sea, lured to its death by small fish. The giant of the sea was prostituting its big existence, pursuing small means. That was the headline in the newspaper. So, as internal auditors, let us not be the giant whale that chases small fish. It will take us to our demise. We need to look at things that matter. In your report, put things that matter, things that executive management should pause what they're doing and look at because they deserve to be in that. Not where they read the report and say, this guy is wasting our time or this lady is wasting our time. Please take note of that. Ethical dilemmas in practice. These are just food for thought. You don't need to give an answer. If you want, you can type in the chat box. But number one, what happens if you are asked to drop audit findings without sufficient and appropriate evidence to the contrary? Do you drop the finding or you still maintain the finding? What do you do when you suspect the finance department is deliberately delaying payments for internal audit activities? You're supposed to go on a trip. Finance department is deliberately not sending you the money into your account. What do? Do you show up on a Monday for a surprise cash count? Or do you retaliate with an audit? What do you do when you feel you're not getting promoted or a pay rise because of your audit findings? Do you extend an invitation to peace or issue a clean audit report? Well, the question is up to you. You get DSA for 10 days. It's very common in Zambia. You're supposed to go and perform an audit out of station for 10 days. And you go there, you work quickly, you finish the work in 5 days. What do you do with the extra 5 days since you finished the work in 5 days? Do you retire the 5 days, the money for the other 5 days, or you put it in your pocket and behave like you worked for 10 days? There's a news heated headline in the news where they suspected fraud at the organization and you are part of the audit and your wife is asking you, what happened? Can you explain to me? You know, there's one audit I investigated where there was some fraud that was uncovered. And my wife was telling me the story to say, can you see this in the newspaper? And I said, when did it happen? I was acting surprised, but I'm the one that issued the report that got that person suspended and ultimately arrested. So I pretended I didn't know. Why? Because I knew if I said I knew, I was going to be asked for details. Of course, we're in a new organization. You've been given an audit to perform, an IT audit. What do you do if you're not qualified to perform IT audits? Do you perform them and say, they will think I don't know what I'm doing, or you ask for the skill sets? What do you do when your audit findings point to senior officers of the organization being at fault? Quickly, I'll explain 2 issues I experienced. In one institution I worked, one of my bosses called me and said, Francis, do you know that the audit reports that you issue are viewed by the regulator? So when you highlight all these anomalies, don't you know that you're exposing the institution to fines? How did I handle it? I explained to the CEO, I said, in as much as winding down now, so in as much as I would like to drop these findings, my professional ethics don't allow me to do so. And I'll be doing a great injustice to the institution if I drop these findings. So the findings is there. The regulator understands our work. What we need to do now is what action taking to resolve these matters. If we can quickly resolve them before the regulator comes, I don't think we'll be fined. So I did use a lot of emotional intelligence in approaching this matter. The other matter was some members of staff, senior members of staff, were abusing fuel. They would be paid fuel allowance on payroll, and then also they would go to the filling station and refuel on the company tab. My recommendation was that they pay back that money, and it was huge sums. And these were senior people in the institution. I was asked to drop the findings. I did the same thing. I explained that I couldn't drop the findings because my professional ethics don't allow me to. The solution would be to them to pay back this money to the institution and we can close out the matter. So, like I said, situation understanding and emotional intelligence is key when it comes to ethical dilemmas. Now, how can you foster a good ethical culture in the institution as a chief audit executive? Number one, try and ensure that everyone in the institution, in your department, is a member of IIA, because then the ethics come into play when you're a member of IIA. Number two, ensure all staff understand and sign Domain 2. In my institution, every year we sign the Code of Ethics, which is now Ethics and Professionalism Attestation, to show that we've read through and we understand what the ethics entail of us. Request staff to complete declaration of interest forms at specific intervals. In my institution, before every audit, we sign declaration of interest that we don't have an interest in that business area. And then annually, we also declare our business interests to the institution. Then have a plan for continuous improvement of competencies. You cannot have a competent team if you don't invest in their competency. You need to invest in that. This is more clear, and it cannot be more clear than this. Put in place a gift policy. Some of the auditors are always getting gifts from auditees. Do you have a gift policy? Very important. Put in place consequences for unethical behavior. If a member of your audit department team behaves unethical, what do you do to them? There must be consequences for unethical behavior, because when there's a consequence, you deter repeat behavior or you deter the same behavior by others. Ensure that staff do not participate in operations. If auditors participate in operations, it affects the objectivity because they come and audit the same area which they performed operations in. That takes away the objectivity. So ensure that auditors do not participate in operations. And if they did, that the same auditors do not go and look at this area, pick other auditors to help in that area. This is only in exceptional situations. Provide a platform for staff to declare ethical dilemmas. Do you have a platform for staff to declare ethical dilemmas? Can they have a conversation with you as a chief audit executive, for instance, on ethical dilemmas? That's a very important question. Have a properly documented internal audit methodology. That's what guides the work that you do. That's what brings forward competence and, due professional care. If there's a methodology, the staff are supposed to follow that methodology. Then you expect little issues around it. Then you cannot replace the need for supervisory review. Sometimes your auditors may not be objective when rating findings. You may come in and correct them. I've had a situation where I gave ratings and the group came in and said, Francis, this rating, we think that you've given a more generous rating. Can we drop this rating? And they gave me reasons why, and we agreed and we moved on in that aspect. So in conclusion, ethical conduct serves as the basis on which internal auditors become trusted advisors. It's the foundation, the base. Without a proper and upright ethical standing, internal audit loses its place as a trusted advisor to the business. When the trust is gone, when internal audit loses its place as a trusted advisor, it cannot add value. It goes therefore that in order for internal audit to maintain its position as a trusted advisor and in line add value, we must behave ethically. That is in line with Domain 2, which is ethics and professionalism of the standards at all times. Ethics should be your partner as you do and perform your internal audit work. At this point, allow me to say Thank you. And through the moderator, I will invite questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Francis. Wow. Wow. That was for sure a practical field of ethics and internal audit. Francis, your expertise and the valuable presentation that we've received goes without saying that I know I didn't tell members this. So Francis is a top achiever of the year according to the Association of Certified Fraud Examiners, ACFE 2021. He was a top achiever of the year for the continent of Africa. Apart from that, he got the Internal Audit Beacons Award by Richard Chambers. Francis, thank you. Thank you. It was worth listening to you. We are moving on now to the Q&A, and we still have 20 minutes for this Q&A. You can post your questions in the chat, but then I have one question that was posted by Anne. Sorry for that. So Anne posted a question, and allow me to read this question so that our presenter can take it. So there's a common problem in organizations, and with whistleblowers, they usually experience negative consequences. These consequences can include job loss and, of course, workplace hostility. How then can we ensure we conform to our ethics, as we've been told by Francis, knowing all these challenges? So that was one question from Anne. As we pick more questions, allow me to invite Francis to take that question. Over from you. Welcome, Francis.
Okay, thank you very much. And that's a very good question. So one of the things that as internal audit you must ensure when you perform your audits is that you must check and verify that your institution has a whistleblower policy. Now, why is this important? Because the whistleblower policy guides on what happens when there's retaliation. I can tell you that in Zambia, we had a case recently. For those, I think there are some from Zambia who joined on the call. We had a case recently where this internal auditor at a government ministry issued audit reports. When he issued audit reports, when going for work, at some point he was attacked and his laptop was stolen. But lucky enough, he had backed up that report. And when he issued this report, his supervisors called him and scolded him, not his supervisors in his department, but in other departments, scolded him for issuing such a report. You know, they told him to withdraw that report and he refused. And they warned him to say, okay, since you've refused, you see. The next day, reported for work, he was given a letter of transfer to a rural area. And this auditor refused that letter of transfer. Then after refusing the letter of transfer, this auditor was dismissed. So when this auditor was dismissed, initially they were suspended, but they were not being paid. Then they were dismissed, you know. And when this happened, this auditor sued. And that auditor was successful in the courts of law because the judge said, looking at the totality of matters at hand, this was definitely a retaliation. Because how do you transfer an auditor in the middle of an audit where he's discovered glaring issues? On top of that, when he refuses a transfer, you suspend him and you don't pay him despite the law saying you must be paying him for a period of time, then you dismiss him. So the judge said that case was in court for like 2 years. And the judge said for the 2 years, they needed to pay him his salary for each of those months. On top of that, they needed to add interest at the bank rate. On top of that, they needed to reinstate him on payroll. So you can imagine why, because there was a policy somewhere. So let's have a whistleblower policy in place. So that in the event that there's retaliation, you can manage it. But I also want to highlight that the internal audit profession, by its very nature, will expose you to instances where you can be bruised, you can have retaliation, and so sometimes you just have to be strong. I will tell you that the institution where I worked, where I uncovered few abuse by senior officers of the institution, after that, they would remove me from trips. Anything nice to do with the employees, they would make sure that I'm not part of the list. It just became bad for me. But I continued working whilst looking for somewhere else I could go. And when an opportunity came to leave, I resigned and I left. So sometimes it's difficult to prove that there's retaliation, but you have to stay strong. It comes with the profession. Remember that it comes the profession, and that's why as internal auditors we need to be good at managing our finances. I talked about that because sometimes you may find yourself on the street. You will need to survive. So always ensure that you're in a position where even if you lost your job, you can somehow manage for a few months or so while you're looking for another one. But overall, a whistleblower policy is going to be very handy and helpful in that situation. Also, make use of your audit committee. If you feel there's retaliation, discuss it with the audit committee and say, I'm having this issue. A good audit committee should be able to protect you. Thank you very much.
Yes, so thank you. Thank you, Francis. Thank you, Francis, for that answer. I'm looking at the chat, trying to pick one or two questions. Members can raise their hands and then they ask questions directly. But as I said, I have picked my piece, and I'm leaving this meeting having picked my part. That number one that I will remember. If I forget everything in this meeting, professional skepticism, very important. Thank you, Francis. Yes, remember this particular webinar was recorded. There's a YouTube channel for that. So I know members were requesting for the presentation slides. We will make sure that that is taken care of. Yes, checking from the chat. Do we have more questions? I can see a message of appreciation. Excellent presentation. Thank you. That is from Pius. Roma Shah, our senior, thank you. Thank you for the insightful presentation. Yeah, so wow. Allow me to now that I've seen there are no more questions. Thank you, members, for joining this webinar, but allow me to welcome. Let me see the chat. Thanks a lot. Yeah, so thank you. Allow me then to welcome our managing partner, Dot, to provide our remarks. Very important. So welcome, Dot.
So thank you very much, Eliasa. Thank you very much, Francis. The thing I have learned the most is how simple we can make these discussions about ethics. And again, just like we started the conversations, that ethics is really a personal thing. So from Francis's examples that are very personal, he has demonstrated how you can still remain ethical and still be able to deliver your work in a good way and still have everyone to benefit from such a process, even through internal auditing. So I don't have much comments to make other than to really thank Francis for giving us his time and for giving us practical examples and practical tips. I can see from the chat that everyone is very happy with the way you presented and what you presented, this is actually why we do this webinar, so that we get these perspectives from practicing internal auditors across. And as you can see, these challenges we experience are experienced across the spectrum. And when we come together here in Dorte&Associates to discuss, we are able to share those perspectives together and inform our journeys. I always like to think of internal auditors as the true guardians of good corporate governance. And even the act itself was of being able to resign and say, no, this is wrong. That is in itself a very powerful statement, which we should be able to reach that level of self-belief and belief in integrity and what we need to do to achieve the things that we need to achieve. So I don't have any further comments. I'd just like to give Francis, and perhaps this time, if possible, you can put on your video so people can see you as you give us a parting shot, Francis.
Yes, thank you.
So maybe Francis.
Yes,
I
please.
know you are a fellow. We have also a fellow in this webinar. So as you provide that closing remark, recognize that we have a fellow in this meeting. Over from you. Thank you.
Oh, yes. Thank you so much. Thank you for the fellows on the platform. Thank you for everyone that attended the webinar. Really, the key message I would like us to take from this is, of course, that with professional ethics, when you hold on to them, ultimately people realize that this person doesn't budge and they come around and they respect your way of doing things. Without ethics, really our profession loses its mandate to be a trusted advisor. So thank you very much for everyone that attended the webinar, but above all, thank you also to Dorte&Associates for making this possible. From Zambia to Kenya and everyone else that is been on the call, thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you. Maybe Dot, I would say I like the smile. Francis, how I wish you were on
The
your
entire
video
time of the
the
presentation.
entire time of the presentation. Yeah, so but over from me to you, Dot.
So Francis, asante sana, that's our Kiswahili way of saying thank you. Like we've imported knowledge from Zambia, so I don't know if we should be taxed. Eliasa, which FCPA is in the house? Perhaps we can give them a moment to say hi.
Yes, thank you. And I've realized we had international audience today. I've seen somebody from Southern Sudan, someone from Botswana. The FCPA, where is Langat? FK Langat. Kindly unmute and say something. Just respecting the fellowship, cutting across Kenya and Zambia.
Yes, and we still have about 15 minutes to 9:30, which is the end of our session. So we can have some bit of interactions, and Francis is still here. So FK, you can unmute and say something.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. Good evening, everyone. Thank you very much, my fellow Francis, for that wonderful presentation. I think I was privileged to be part of this sitting. And from Zambia, we thank you most sincerely for the very nice presentation that you gave this wonderful evening. And just want to mention that it is very encouraging. Most of us sitting here are heading the function of internal audit, and what is coming out apparently is that we have to go an extra mile, so that we can be able to deliver on our mandate. I'm thankful and grateful that CPA Dot and Liasa and team found you to be our guest this wonderful evening. Asanteni sana, and the team from Botswana and everywhere else, Cameroon, we thank you for logging in. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, FK. There's someone from Sudan who could say something, greet us and tell us how ethics is in Sudan. You can unmute and say something. Okay, Sudan is quiet.
Yeah.
What about Okedise? from Gaborone. Would you like to say something? You can unmute and say something.
Good evening.
Good evening.
Thank you. I think I enjoyed the presentation. I learned quite a lot, and I'm hoping we'll find a way of balancing a lot of the things that were spoken today. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay.
Can I go?
Yes.
Hello?
Go ahead.
Yes, thank you very much. My name is CIA CPHR Sotori. I'm the head of internal audit for KCB Bank South Sudan. I want to take this opportunity to thank you for the wonderful presentation. Those of us who have been waiting for this, we are very grateful. I also want to thank CIA, CPA, CRMA, Dorte for organizing this one. And I wish everyone here a wonderful evening. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Sure.
Great. So we have very good feedback, Francis. We still have 10 minutes. Anybody else who has something to say? You have the mic. Just unmute yourself. Okay, so Francis has armed us with real-time nuggets. So you can try and memorize one of them. So you practice it in your next encounter where you have an ethical dilemma. Okay, Paul Wafula, would you like to unmute and say that in person? From Kakamega County. Paul, would you like to say that in person? Remember, our sessions are meant to be as interactive as possible, so you can engage with our speaker and learn from him right here. Okay, so if we don't have any other comments, Eliasa?
Yes, so I know, yes, Francis, this was powerful. But as we come to the end of this webinar, so Dot, I want to give you some 2 minutes to say what we usually don't say in this webinar, because it's been running we've been running episode 1, season 1 to 12. And I want to, it's a special time to allow you to say what we usually don't say. I know what is happening around in this profession. Just 2 minutes and then we wrap it up.
Okay. There's a hand that has been raised by Kashingwe Mbewe. You can go ahead. Unmute yourself. I hope I'm pronouncing the name well.
You pronounced it very well, Dorothy.
Okay, you raised your hand. Please unmute yourself and speak. Okay, go ahead. Okay, so.
Yes, Dot, kindly proceed.
This is what Eliasa wants me to talk about is not part of this session. So you will allow me to end the recording and